Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lemiola Rinkatola. I'm the founder of the Critical Thinking Child, and I want to say welcome to today's parent training webinar. Today, we're going to talk all about assessments, and in particular, we're going to dive in deep on one particular assessment tool that many of you are familiar with, and many of you have emailed or contacted me about questions on the NWEA MAP, and in particular, what you can do to support your child academically at home once you get the results back. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. And then we also have joining us today is Cheryl Lynn. Cheryl, are you there?
I am here.
Okay, great. For those of you who are not familiar with the Critical Thinking Child, you should know what we do. We focus on helping kids reach their academic potential by teaching parents how to foster critical thinking skills at home. And we do this by supplying hands-on materials and resources like this webinar to give you information so that you can unlock your child's learning potential. So we have a variety of ways in which we do this with the focus of helping kids be able to think and learn with confidence. Okay. Before I go on, I'll let Cheryl do an introduction of who she is and what she does.
I'm Cheryl Lind. I'm a school psychologist. I'm on staff at the Center for Gifted, which runs enrichment programs for gifted children throughout the Chicago area. And I do a lot of testing of gifted kids. I do testing for kids who are very bright, but also kids who are bright and have learning issues as well. And I find testing helps parents understand their children better, their strengths, their weaknesses, and their learning styles.
Awesome. It's always a pleasure to have you tag team with you, Cheryl. We have a lot of fun on these training sessions. And today we're going to dive in a little deeper on one particular assessment test. But before then, myself personally, this is a little confetti on the screen because I have done over 1,000 assessments in the past 10 years. So through working with our critical thinking boot camp and then also supporting kids who are looking for not just selective enrollment schools, but who are just looking to understand how they can improve in working with parents. So I was real excited about that getting to 1,000 takes a lot of time and a lot of patience. So we're going to bring our expertise, both Cheryl and myself. We know a lot about this topic, not just through theory, but because we've had the pleasure of working directly with children, and children as young as 3 years old for me, Cheryl, and then going up to, 8th grade and even high school. So Cheryl, how young do you start?
Well, I do a lot of IQ testing, and generally 4-year-olds is about as young as I go, but I've done some 2-year-olds, some 3-year-olds, and that's always an interesting challenge.
Yes, it sure is. Okay, so we'll continue to the next slide, and here we're going to talk about the frequently asked questions that parents have been, sending me via email. We're going to talk about assessments, in general, what are they? Why do we do them? Who do they benefit? Why is it important? A lot of these questions you may already, know. So we're just going to tap into at a very, bird's eye view, 30,000 feet level on these first couple of questions. And then we will dive in deep and use sort of a walkthrough and a case study of one of the NWEA MAP assessment results. Okay, so we're going to know what are the benefits, why is it important, what does it tell us, okay, which is key. Parents want to know, when I get the report, what do I do? How do I make sense of it? Okay, and what can we do as next steps going forward? Okay, so when we talk about assessment today, we are talking about assessment for learning. Okay, that's so critical to understand to make sure we are on the same page. So we're talking about your child's learning expectations typically in a school environment. There are 3 types of assessment. Okay, and we're not going to get into the technical terms because we know some of you are not educators by trade, your parents, and you may have a different trade or field of study. And what I want to do is just use regular language that's going to help resonate with you, so that you can understand some of the information with ease. So what I have for you is that there are three main types of assessments. Now, when you research that, they may change the names up, but I want you to just bear in mind whenever you hear assessments or your child is being tested for something, try to see which one of these three buckets it may fit into. So let's start with the first one. The first one can be called formative assessment. It also goes by other names. I've seen diagnostic assessments. But this particular assessment, if you can think of it sort of a pre and post assessment, okay? Now you're starting off, and we do a lot of these assessments, especially when we first work with a family. We want to get a baseline assessment so that we can understand, where their learning highs and lows are. Okay, so this is what some teachers may use, even in the classroom. It doesn't have to be something that takes a lot of time. They can use exit tickets. You may have heard of that. Self-assessments sometimes, where they'll have a child or student evaluate themselves after a lesson. So they'll do a pre and post assessment after it's some type of intervention. Okay. The second type is benchmark. And this benchmark really is about the evaluation of strengths and weaknesses for a particular grade level. Okay, so if I were to do sort of the benchmark assessment, or you may be familiar with that with some of the tests, sort of like the PARC test, and we'll get into some of these acronyms later, but even as far back as the ITBS, the Iowa Test for Basic Skills, they may have changed the name now, but benchmark assessments have been around for a while. And I think some of you may even remember your benchmark assessment. This would have been the assessment that really, showed if you were on grade level or not. So for those of you on the have access to the chat, if you can go ahead and type in the type of assessment that you remember doing, the standard assessment that evaluated you at a grade level. So go ahead and type that in, and we'll take a look at that later. And if you don't remember, because some parents are like, well, I don't want to go that far back, that may be a while, go ahead and type in one for your child. The last type we have is mastery. And this is typically, you'll be familiar with this if you know about the ACT or SAT. These are the high stakes tests that really shows over a summation of time if you have actually mastered a particular level of learning or particular standards and so forth. So it's more like your cumulative learning evaluation, and they're usually high stakes. Okay, those are the three types. And these types can also be delivered differently, okay? What we have here is we may have an assessment done one-on-one. Cheryl does a lot of these types of assessments when she's doing her IQ evaluation, one-on-one directly with a student. You can also have assessments that are pen and paper, right? With the Scantron sheet, where it may be in a classroom style environment. And then last, and this is where we're seeing a lot of assessments going, into the future now, where they are digital and they can be done online, either using a computer or a tablet. So the other thing you want to keep in mind is when you get feedback from your school or teacher about your child is going to be assessed on this day or take a test on this day, you should ask which format, okay? Because it does make a difference on the format, especially for some kids who have, different learning styles. As we often talk about the learning styles, that some kids are more visual learners, audio learners. those type of things. And some kids even have challenges with filling out the Scantron bubbles. They really do. So you really want to know how that assessment is going to be delivered. Here are just some of the top acronyms, okay, that you probably may already be familiar with. But these are just sort of the popular ones, if you want to say that. At least they come across through my work with families and students. I see these particular assessments a lot. The Common Core standard actually is not really an assessment. It is the standards that were developed to basically say what children are expected to learn by a particular grade level. Okay, so these assessments have been in place for nearly a decade now. Okay, they actually, prior to that, individual states had their own assessment tool, and Common Core has really taken somewhat of a shift. Initially, the vast majority of states, I think there were a few outliers, adopted the Common Core. But then over time, now what we're seeing is that with the next generation standards, states are adopting that, or they've abandoned the Common Core and for a different type of standards that they've developed themselves. So the key is wherever you're calling in from, make sure you follow up with your district, with your state, and with your school, and see what standards they're using, because what we're talking about today doesn't apply to everyone. Okay, these are options, and the school and the district and the state actually set up the parameters for students. Okay, so that's very important. PARCC is just one example, and again, these are just, we're not even scratching the surface. There's so many assessment tools out there, but I think your big takeaway is understanding that there are learning standards in place at a state level, and you need to find out what standards your school is using if you don't already know. PARCC is a tool that is much like the benchmark. You know, at the end of the year, if you're in third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, they're going to do some type of assessment just to make sure that you have learned the standards for that grade level. And the NWEA MAP, we're going to drill down into detail on that particular assessment tool, you know, as well. And when we look at DIBELS, some of you have mentioned DIBELS. DIBELS, in my experience, tend to be used for the pre-K and kindergarten level. I see a lot of utilization with DIBELS when it comes to reading assessments and understanding phonics and making sure that the foundational skills are there. Now, that's not to say any of the other assessment tools that you may be presented with are not doing the same thing. These are just some of the common ones that we're showing on the screen. So let's dive in a little deeper on, we know assessments, the purpose is for learning, and we want to sort of measure how much, you know, a child is learning within the school year. What are we concerning ourselves with? Definitely in the academic environment, we are looking to measure reading and English language arts. Okay, so that ELA is for English language arts. So reading skills are typically part of an assessment in some way, in some fashion. Even reading the questions is part of the assessment, right? And that includes math as well, because there are math word problems that involve words. And then we have math and science that can also be assessed as well. And again, it really depends on what your school, your district, and what's set up for your state for the measurement. This is the purpose. The why is we want to make sure our kids are ready for college. They're going through, you know, over a decade of school before entering college, and we want to make sure that they have the tools and the skills ready for them to succeed in college and in a career of their choice, right? So that's why we don't want to wait until the end of high school to do an assessment and to figure out that Johnny doesn't know, you know, A, B, C, and D, that would create a problem. So that's why um, schools are, continuing to do assessments and evaluations. And I know sometimes it can be um, seems like somewhat of an inconvenience, right? We have a kid coming home and they're complaining, oh my God, we have another test. I got my homework and then this big test is here. And it seems like a lot to juggle, but in the end, there is a purpose for it. And it really is to find out now rather than later so that, there can be some type of opportunity for intervention. Now, the benefits of these assessments is that we want to make sure that we have good standards and good gauge. I like to think of it sort of, making sure that we're not comparing apples to oranges. Like we want to make sure that when we're reading assessments and giving assessments that we have some type of, qualifying tool that will successfully give information that can allow a student to figure out what they need to learn next or where their weaknesses are. So that's why these tools have been research-based and they've been, in the marketplace for quite some time. So as a parent, you need to just trust that when the school has selected their tool of choice, their assessment of choice. The NWEA assessment, I believe, has been over 10 million students nationwide have taken that test in some way. That's a lot of students. Okay, so the tools that your schools are selecting, they do a lot of due diligence, I have found in my experience, to make sure that they're picking the right one. So even though you may compare another school is using this tool, another one is using a different one, talk to your school if you have any questions about it, but chances are they've done the investigation of choice. Also, as we're comparing apples to apples, we want to go deeper and we want to find out, how are these students different? Cheryl had talked about that she doesn't only work with, highly gifted children, that she also worked with children who are struggling and have areas where they can use a boost, right? So we want to be able to have assessment tools help us identify that. That's what I see the purpose of assessing. And we also want to be able to identify students who may be lagging behind, those that need to move ahead, right? And those that are already ahead of the game, and what we need to do to provide support so that they're not bored or they don't feel like they're being held back because they're not challenged in the classroom. So if we have all the students in a classroom, just like we have the fish in a bowl, a good assessment should be able to identify, where that student is. Is that student generally, falling within the average range, or is this a student who can move up in math or provide more challenge in math, but their reading is pretty much, within the average as well? Or do we just have a student that in both reading and math, they're actually at a 5th grade level, but they're operating at an 8th grade level? Or if we have a student who's at kindergarten and they went to a high quality daycare, parents invested a lot of time and energy and support in their early childhood academic years. And so that being said, the child is already reading at, age 5 and doing number sense. You may have a child who's, ready to jump beyond kindergarten now because they already know how to read. They know their letters, they know the phonics, and they can operate at a 1st and 2nd grade level. So that's why it's important. And in my opinion, I would say by age 4, you have at least one assessment done. You can't go 5 years. Well, you shouldn't. And again, this is my opinion. You shouldn't go 5 years without knowing where your child is academically. And because as parents, we do a lot of things, right? We read, we help them with math, we have them count staircases. We start very early. But then we wait until their first assessment in school, and that may be by the time they're, depending on the school, it could be 3rd grade actually. So if you can, as early as, 4, that's a good baseline, and that should be able to take you, give you information and insight on what you need to do next. Now, you can type your questions into the chat, and Cheryl, if you wouldn't mind, let's monitor those questions as they come along. Feel free to stop me at any time if you have some comments to add to this. We're going to dive in deep, and we're going to just take one assessment for today. We obviously can't do them all because we wouldn't have enough time on this webinar. So we're just going to do the NWEA MAP, okay? So this is published by the Northwest Evaluation Association. That's what that acronym is for. And it's a computerized test given to children in grades K through 12, okay? This is a computerized test that is adaptive, okay? So it's really going to measure the growth and performance of students at their grade level, identify if they're below grade level, or identify if they are above grade level. And that's why I really love this assessment. This is one of my favorite assessment tools to look at the data and figure out how I can help a child move forward. Okay, so we talked about, just so you know, the test is untimed, but typically students spend about an hour per subject completing it. It is digital. For the younger groups, it can have audio support. It just depends on, what component of the MAP test that they're providing. One thing you should follow, and that is called the RIT scale, R-I-T scale, Roche unit. That's where they get the name from, Roche unit. So that scale is like a stable measure. Okay, so if you can imagine, if you wanted to measure your child's growth every year in height, and you would lean them up against the wall and maybe make notches every year on their birthday and monitor and see each year how much they've grown. This tool is similar to that. It's like inches on a ruler, okay? So this is the way it works. If a child answers a question correctly, then it gets more challenging. Okay, it is an adaptive test. So this is an example of what an adaptive test means. Okay, because some of the assessments that I talked about earlier are not adaptive. It's just pretty much a standard base, like the park, end of the year, everyone's going to take the third grade test. Here are the third grade questions. Here are the fourth grade questions, etc. This test is different. Okay, so if they get the question right, then it's going to get more challenging. What happens if they get it wrong? It gets a little easier. Okay, so let's do a walkthrough, a visual walkthrough of what that might look like. So question 1, we see question 1 on the screen. If you look at the vertical bar, that's the RIT level. We talked about that RIT level being like a ruler. And then if you look at the horizontal bar, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, those are the question numbers. Okay, you with me? So question 1 is in green. They got that correct. Okay, and this may be, let's say, starting at a 4th grade level. Okay, because we see that RIT is close to 220. Question 2, they also got correct. And do you see how, because they got question 1 correct, the question may be a little bit harder now. They're moving up. And again, this is just a simulated example. Now, what we have on the screen, we see that question 3, I have a red X there. So question 3 was incorrect. And you see they got up maybe to 235. Okay, 235. That was too hard. That was a hard question for the student. So they missed it. Okay, then the system jumps down. Again, question 4 incorrect, it jumps down. Again, 5 incorrect, but then now, question 6, they got that correct. But then question 7, missed that. So it's really trying to find out where the child is ready to learn. Look at this full graph, okay? And you can see all of the reds with X's are the questions missed, and then you can see green, those are the questions they got correct. All right, so where did they typically land? Right around 216 as a RIT. score, okay? So this is what we mean by an example of adaptive. It's going to go up and down depending on the correct response, okay? So it may not be in this frequency. This is just an example so that we can explain it visually of what an adaptive test may look like, okay? If you have any questions, put that into the chat. Let's dive into some of the reports. Here's an example of a report that you actually may receive. I think this is one of the most common ones that parents will share with me. This one here is for the math, and you'll see on the left, you'll see bar charts there, and they are color-coded. So you can just read the footnote and it'll tell you, for example, the bar in black, that is the student's RIT score. So the student in this example had a score of 180. Okay, and this student is in kindergarten. This is their math winter score of 180. Now, the other bars will tell you the district mean or the district average RIT or the norm grade RIT, meaning what is the normal for that grade level, what are students who have taken this test, what are their RIT scores looking like? So it allows you to compare your child not only within your district, but on a national level. That's the beauty of this test. I mean, I have no affiliation with the NWEA, the Critical Thinking Child. We're not in partnership with them by any means at all, but you know, I will say that this type of tool provides some very powerful data and useful information that allows us to support children in their academic expectations and helping them to grow academically. If you look over to, let's see if I can get a bigger picture of that for you. So now we're looking at, if you can see that better, 180. Underneath it, you'll see FA 18, that's fall 18. W, I believe that's WI for winter, and then SP for spring. Now, spring is not here yet, so that's the number you see at the top is the projected, okay? And then right below that, you see the math goals performance and how they're doing in each of these areas, which are areas aligned to the Common Core standards. Algebraic thinking, measurement, number sense, and geometry. Now, this is what parents pay a lot of attention to. They skip the previous slide, most of them, and they go straight to the percentile, and they look across and say, okay, if I like this number, my child is doing well. And if I don't, I guess we've got some work to do. And that can be true, but it all depends. So I'm going to help you dive a little bit deeper so that you can maybe have a better appreciation for this tool in terms of the information that it's really trying to tell you. And at its core, it's really trying to tell you and tell the teachers, because this was a tool designed for teachers, okay? I know it's being used in different formats now. Some districts are using it as one of the elements to get into a selective school, like part of that score. But the tool was initially designed for teachers to help teachers identify what kids are ready to learn next. Okay, what is the next learning opportunity for this student? Okay, this is what you may see if your child has taken this test more than once. You'll start to see, look at that. Remember we talked about measuring the height of a child year after year? You get a great opportunity to see this year after year progression or year after year reporting, okay? Because sometimes the RIT scale is fluctuating, and then you have the standard deviation, and then you also have the percentile there, okay? And the percentiles is in a range just like the RIT score is. And I see we have a question coming in. Cheryl, do you see that question? Or should I continue? Okay, I'll go ahead and continue, and we'll come back.
Here, okay. When we take the test, our school district has not where can we take the test? Our school district has not implemented this test.
Okay. This is a school-based test, so you have to be a school to administer this test. But I have heard that Northwestern Center for Talented Development is offering the tests. They did in the past in December of last year, and they are collecting feedback on whether they're going to continue that. And that is something that you can do independent of whether your child is at a public school or private school. So you can send me an email and I'll put you in contact with them, or you can go to Google and that would be the Northwestern CTD, Center for Talented Development. Okay. Apart from that, in my experience, this test has only been offered through a school district. So that is the only opportunity that I have heard. If anyone else have heard of another opportunity where you can take this test, if your school district is not offering it, let me know. But Northwestern is the only one that I've heard of so far. Good question. Okay, let's dive into the student goal setting. This is one of the reports. Okay, so we looked at the summary report, but I also want you to keep in mind that there are other reports that you can find useful, and not every school is printing the same report. Okay, so some schools may use a different type of report. It just really depends on what your teacher has access to and how everything is set up. But I've seen what this report is called the Student Growth Setting Report. Now, what's interesting about this report is that it is color-coded oftentimes in green and yellow. So what you want to pay attention to is any of the yellows that will highlight, because that's going to tell you exactly where you need to work. And in this example, you'll see that for reading, what's highlighted in yellow is the vocabulary acquisition. So that means this child needs to work on vocabulary, okay, in order to get those scores up. To improve their scores, they need more vocabulary support. The other thing to pay attention to would be the student action plan. They usually write on an action plan and share that with the parents so that both the teachers and parents are working on the same goal. This is what to look for. Again, when you get a report like this, and this is part of the NWEA reporting system, look for the RIT so that you can understand the projected and the growth. Look to see if you have any yellows on your screen, and then also look for the action plan, okay? If your school gives you a student profile report, okay, that may look something like this. Again, they took the NWEA MAP test, but your output looks like this. These are the things you want to look for on the student profile report. Again, look for the RIT, and we'll talk a little bit more about that RIT, that 3-digit number. And it's interesting, this is the number that kids will remember. They don't remember the percentages. If I ask a kid, how did they do on their NWEA test? They'll give me a 3-digit number. And then I use a particular graphing scale to kind of see where they fell in percentage-wise. So here you want to make sure you look at that by instructional area, look at the norm percentages, okay, over there to the left. It's a nice, pretty formatted chart. And then in this example is reading, make sure you look at the Lexile range, okay? So the Lexile range really is another tool. If you look at the bottom left where it says readability measures, I tried to highlight in yellow all of the areas I wanted you to focus on this screen. So at the very bottom, you'll see that yellow readability measure. That's where you'll find the Lexile measure. And you can go to lexile.com and it will give you appropriate literature and books that your child can read based on that Lexile level. So mom and dad, that's another way that you can pick out great books that are within their reading range just by using that tool. I think a lot of parents forget about that Lexile level and then they just focus on that percentages and then they sort of panic from there. But there's lots of information on how you can get started Now, the norms are of great value to educators and teachers because, again, these reports allow teachers to really develop an individualized instruction. And for educators like me, I get to personalize the tutoring instruction for, every single child, because using information like this, I can identify their strengths and opportunities for growth and design a program that's going to help them move that needle up, and then also help them learn what they're ready to learn next. So this is a great tool to help them achieve academic and their academic goals. You'll also start to see some patterns, especially if they take it twice a year or 3 times a year. I think schools are typically doing at least 2 times a year. Again, you got to check with your school district, but for those that are doing it at least 2 times a year, you get to see some type of trending. And this is what parents really pay attention to. It's also important to keep in mind that, as they go up a grade level, the work gets, a little bit more challenging through the grades. So that's important to keep in mind. This is where you would take your RIT scores and go in deeper to see how your child is doing. So we had a student, and I highlighted in yellow just to kind of make it easy during this presentation. So if your child's RIT score is for reading, this is reading up here, is 200, then you'll see, and they're in kindergarten, okay? And they're getting a reading RIT score of 200. You'll see they have reading skills at a 4th grade level, okay? Now, it can work the reverse. You may have a student in 4th grade, but their RIT score may be 184. Then, they have some skills that are at a 2nd grade level, and there's opportunity for them to get support so that they can, reach grade level and hopefully beyond that. Same thing with math. So when you get your RIT score, try to look and see where the bands are. And I say this because, we sometimes have parents who they'll see a score of 80 or 90, and they kind of panic a bit. And I think they may not realize the RIT level involved in reaching a score or percentile of, 95 or 99. Your RIT has to be very high, which really means, here's your big takeaway. If I can just sum it up for you based on the data, your RIT score is operating at, let me rephrase it. If you're seeing a percentile of, 98, 99, most likely that child is operating at a level that's a year and a half to 2 years above their current grade level. Now, I have looked at over 100 NWEA reports in just the last month alone, and it correlates to that. I have a lot of high achieving students, so I'm able to look at their percentages and then go back and look at their RIT, and most of them are at that, close to 2 years above grade level. I also have some students who are really high on the reading and then need more support on the math. So for some parents, that's if their child is below 80 or below 85 percentile, okay? Or the reverse of it. So with that, and we should all remember that, we hate using these labels like gifted, right? But what's important to know is that gifted doesn't mean you're smart in everything. It's not about that. It's about you have certain, skills that are above your peers, but then there could be other skills that you're struggling at. So that's why, we really don't like using the gifted label in the industry that we work in, because I really feel all kids are gifted. We just need to figure out what those gifts are, and we need to support them accordingly. And this is one of the tools that help us to do it. Now here, this is another report. This is the growth norms. Your big takeaway in looking at this slide is that you should know that as your child ages through the grades and goes through the grade level, it is more and more difficult to improve that RIT score. The work is just more difficult. And you can see that in the first column when you look at the mean. Let's look at reading. And we see kindergarten is at 10.3, 10.8, and I'm descending now. I'm going down this column, 9.5, 7.3. When we get to 7th grade, 2.5. It's just that it just doesn't move as much. So what that can tell you is if you put a lot of time in the early years and really focus on helping them to learn the reading, the mechanics, the foundational skills, the math number sense, how to appropriately do, addition and subtraction beyond just memorization, they will see a lot of growth. That's why we have some at a kindergarten level. You saw my student two or three slides ago, and she's in kindergarten and her RIT is like a 180. It's because they followed the plan and they started early. So the earlier you start, the greater the opportunities where they can, free their brain cells up to learn new information. And they're not trying to go back and learn something they should have learned in a previous grade level, because it does get more difficult. Okay, so we want to be able to challenge our top performers, but we don't want to overwhelm students, right? So that's the purpose of really understanding this material. Ask your teacher if you have any questions about any of the scores. They're the best person to ask. Also, there's a resource out here that the NWEA puts out on their website, and it's the Parent Toolkit. Okay, so it is a document that they have that really explains it in a way. I just point this to parents, but I find that using just the common language that we use and going over the slides the way we did really helps parents kind of make sense, because it's a lot of data and it's a lot of teacher talk. And there's nothing wrong with teacher talk. I love teacher talk, but sometimes when we're doing the teacher talk and the acronyms, and it could be confusing for a parent. And all we want to know is cut to the chase. What do I need to do, and how do I need to do it? So now I think I want to share another slide with you to tell you about how we do it and what we do. But first, let me see if there's any questions before moving on to that slide. Cheryl, do we have any questions? And then before sharing and giving some insight on, how we work with children and how we help them grow within, their percentile score or the RIT, I want to share some feedback on how my team and how we work, because we've been doing this for, I want to say 15 years with this particular report, and it has evolved. So, the NWEA now is aligned to Common Core. It's been aligned for some years. Their standards, their normative data, I think they're coming out with some new normative data if they haven't already published that. But there's lots of information that can help you. I think the best thing is to know where your child is at, the percentile score and the RIT, and then dive in deep on, what that might look like for support.
We have one question. Where can we find the chart for the RIT percentiles?
That's a good question. I actually have that chart for the RIT percentiles, and I usually find it just by Googling. I should have had that up. It is online. You Google that RIT chart, RIT, NWEA RIT. I'll try to find it if time permits, and then maybe put a link to it. Is there another question?
I'd like to add something. Sometimes, first of all, it's good to understand the purpose of the MAP testing. It's good for you as parents to have this information, but it's actually the person who needs it the most is the teacher. The MAP testing in the fall tells the teacher where your child is at, where all the children in the classroom is at. So she's able to find anyone who's low, who's average, who's achieving. above. And by identifying anyone who's low, then hopefully there will be other resources for that child. Maybe not. It tells the teacher that child needs extra resources in the classroom as well, and from the teacher. The teacher should be doing, if you have a child who's low in reading or in math, the teacher needs to be doing those formative assessments often. And what she needs to be recognizing throughout the fall is that child making progress? Is that child making progress in a way that's going to get them caught up? And this testing should actually be informing the instruction for the teacher, because there are a lot of ways to present the same concept. So if the teacher is saying, I'm teaching it in this way, and this child am I giving these assessments along the way, and lo and behold, the child's not making progress, the teacher needs to know, I need to change up the instruction. I need to give more minutes. I need to give more one-on-one time. I need to give more small group time. This is how it actually, that's the most effective best practices way in using the MAP testing or the NWEA. The winter assessment, say a teacher doesn't quite do that, the winter assessment tells the principal, this child is still low. This child still, the teacher needs to be doing more. Maybe there's more interventions that need to happen. So I think that might help parents to understand this is really for teachers for the most, this MAP testing. The other thing I'd like to bring up is sometimes kids go in the fall and they're scoring very high in the 90th percentile, and then lo and behold, in the winter time, they're like in the 70s. And parents come to me and they say, oh, my child has declined. Well, it's not that your child has declined, it's that the other children got caught up. And so in order to avoid that decline for your child, the teacher needs to keep pushing your child who might be ahead, or that will happen. Any questions about that? Does that make sense, Lemmy?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It does make sense. I think if you can let us know if any of you have a situation at your school where your NWEA map is used for another indicator or qualifier besides what Cheryl has just mentioned. And I'm actually looking for I see the images here. They have a lot of information on their website, but you know, it's just not easy to navigate, I find, unless you really know what you're looking for. Here's a chart reference I found. Just make sure if you find anything online that you verify the source. Okay, so here's again, I'm using this Mac for the first time, so this is very interesting. Let me see if I'm able, if I'm able to post. I'm gonna post a link. Someone wanted to know where they can get the RIT reference chart. So hopefully you can find it in that document. Okay, so let me share in the time that we have left. Let me get to another document here. And I just wanted to show you what we do is we really focus on that RIT score. You know, after we look at the percentages, then we focus on the RIT score, and we start to do individualized support. And this is one of the issues I was having as an educator when I was seeing, you know, NWEA test prep, and it was a group setting where everyone was getting the same, everyone in the class was getting the same, you know, test questions, and that just didn't make sense to me, because I knew behind the scenes that this test was really shedding more light, and the best way to do it is having some type of personalized approach, because it really is some very powerful information. Okay, so I don't know if this is the right screen or not. Okay. Are there any other questions?
Have any advice for parents of a child who performs above grade level on MAP on all 3 tests, but does not show consistent equal levels of knowledge on classroom work? Oh, interesting question.
Say the question again. They have
It's a long
above.
question. Looking for advice for a child who performs well on testing, but does not demonstrate that level of proficiency in the classroom.
Okay, is that the NWEA test? Or is that a different type of test?
It's a NWEA test, yes.
Okay, so we know that if they perform well, and you know, we haven't defined what well means because that looks different for some parents. That means they have the skill set to do it. It could just be, I had a situation, there's a number of things until we get a little bit more detail, but here's an example. I had a student who, parent has shared with me that the classroom structure was just way too noisy. Like they had, their school was designed with very little walls. And in kindergarten, it was fine, but then first and second grade, it really became a distraction for the student. The classwork and the homework level, everything just started to go down. Although the test results were still showing that the student was, you know, doing well. So you know, we really have to kind of see what is the motivating factor. If they're able to do the work and the data shows that their performance level and, you know, the skill level that they're, you know, able to do it. Now we will know that when children are learning something new, sometimes they may struggle initially, but then, you know, with additional support, they can hopefully get over that hump and then move on accordingly. So we really have to find out what might be motivating, you know, the child. Sometimes they're just, it might be a clash, and you know, it could be a
Yes.
number of things.
Yes,
honestly.
It could be personality, doesn't like the teacher, doesn't want to perform for the teacher for some reason. Also, I was thinking the work in the classroom could be if they're doing well on math testing, then they already know this information. Are they getting bored? Are they having too much repetition, too much drill and practice, and they're just losing interest?
I mean, that could be. I know that didn't really help too much, but it really is. It could be a variety of factors, and we would need to have a deeper discussion to kind of give you more guidance. So, what do you see on the screen now?
What do I see?
Yeah, what do you see on the screen now? I think we're just about out of time.
NWEA, yeah.
Okay. All the wonders of learning a Mac. So I don't know if you have to do stop share and then you have to share again. Okay, so I wanted to. Okay. Okay, well, I guess this computer is gonna, I'll just say this because I don't know if you'll be able to get the visual. But the way we do it, we actually take the RIT and we break those RIT bands into grade levels, and then we provide links where by that RIT level, kids can get, you know, support to increase their vocabulary, their reading skills, etc. So we do have the tools, and if you're interested in that, just send me an email, and you know, I can share that with you. Again, we've been doing this, and it's been tested until we've gotten kids that have proven results. two things that I want to say for any of you who find yourself in a situation, perhaps you're, with the Chicago Public School District and the MAP test, because I think they are one of the districts that will use the MAP test as one of the qualifying indicators to sit for a gifted or selective enrollment test, okay? Then that paints a different picture in the mind of a parent, because now this almost feels like a high stakes test. My child has got to perform on this test well, even to qualify for a program that I really feel that they would be wonderful in. So we do have situations like that, and type into the chat if that's your situation. But if that is your situation, my advice for you is to remember that this MAP test is really focused on, to give kids support. Vocabulary is going to be key. It's about vocabulary and skill practice. So if you can increase your child's vocabulary, and we've done this time and time again, a lot of times kids are not familiar with, some of the vocabulary terms. In particular, maybe the math terms. So as they go up through the bands, increasing their vocabulary is going to be key. And we have a good strategy. I was going to show you the strategy, but we're out of time and I can't pull up the slides, unfortunately. But yeah, that's kind of like how we do that. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Cheryl, it's always a pleasure. Until the next time.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for joining. Have a great day.